It is now official. CNN projects that Donald Trump has been elected president, defeating Vice President Kamala Harris and making a political comeback unlike any in modern American politics. Now, we can make this projection now because CNN projects that Donald Trump has won Wisconsin. You can see right there, currently ahead by 30,000 votes with 99% of the vote in. Mr. Trump is only the second former president in U.S. history to be reelected to the White House. He will return to office after 2 impeachments in his first term, followed by unprecedented criminal indictments and felony convictions. Mr. Trump scoring a landmark victory as he now heads back to power, leading a politically divided nation. Again, CNN projects that Donald J. Trump is elected the 47th president of the United States. Let's go over. Actually, let's just take a quick look at the wall here. We can see with Wisconsin, Donald Trump now has 276 electoral votes, Harris with 219. You need 270 to win. He is now over that mark. The 10 electoral votes in Wisconsin puts him over that threshold, and CNN now considers him the president-elect of the United States of America. Let's go over to the magic wall. Phil Mattingly is there. Let's talk about Wisconsin because those votes from Milwaukee that we were promised came in. That's what made the difference. The margin's actually a lot smaller for Trump than it had been, but still enough.
Right. What we've been waiting for throughout the course of the night has been a significant chunk of vote in Milwaukee had been outstanding. What we saw about 5 minutes ago was 109,000 votes that came in Milwaukee, largest county in the state, 16% of the population, usually a Democratic stronghold. That vote broke down about 80% Harris to 20% Trump, roughly, based on, as I was kind of doing the math on it. It changed the margin in Milwaukee by a fairly couple points amount. Not a dramatic amount, but a fairly couple points amount. There is still some vote outstanding, but obviously this was enough for our decision desk to make the calculation that Donald Trump's 30,000 plus vote lead right now was enough to call the state of Wisconsin, give Donald Trump, project Donald Trump to be the next president of the United States. I think what this doesn't change, despite the fact more than 100,000 votes came in a Democratic county, that vote split 80-20 for Harris, that margin, while it is significant, is still beneath what Joe Biden was doing in 2020. And so it's the similar story. It's not as dramatic as it had been in terms of Harris underperforming Biden in Milwaukee County, like we've seen in some other urban areas. Wayne County right now is still holding in that space. Philadelphia is still holding in that space as well. But underperforming in Milwaukee County by a point or around a point. At the same time, there's underperformance or matching margins in a place like Dane County, the second largest county in the state, a Democratic stronghold. Joe Biden back in 2020 won this 75.5%. Harris running about 0.6 of a point behind him. And the reason that's problematic is if you push up into areas around vote drivers like Waukesha. Look, what's interesting about Waukesha, if you push up into the more rural parts of Wisconsin, Donald Trump's running up big margins, not a ton of vote. Waukesha, Washington, and Ozaukee, we call them the WOW counties. These are pushing out in the exurban counties around Milwaukee, where there's been some view, and I think there's been some midterm years where Democrats have said Ozaukee in particular is that type of demographic makeup, that type of median income makeup that we can really make some inroads here. Donald Trump lost a little bit of ground here back in 2020. He won it by a little over 12 points, but holding more or less the margin, shedding a little bit here, actually doing better over here in Washington County. Waukesha, crucial, Waukesha, as they like to say, third largest county in the state. So in these big vote drivers, the Democrats thought they could make inroads, pushing out of their urban and suburban areas into the exurban areas. They simply didn't.
Normally when we just project the winner of the presidential race, it would be a huge historic moment. I will say that it's been so clear over the last few hours, it was trending this way. It maybe doesn't land with the same boom that it would have otherwise, and that's because of what we're seeing in these other so-called blue wall states. Let's just check on Michigan, which we haven't called yet, where that's trending.
So 95% in right now. Donald Trump with 116,503 vote lead. The question kind of always in these moments of time, race hasn't been called yet. You see a lead like that in Michigan, which is significantly larger than Donald Trump had when he first shattered the blue wall back in 2016. Where's the vote outstanding? What are people waiting for? What are the potential pathways? You're looking at the biggest blue bubble. That's where the most vote is outstanding in a Democrat-led district right now. This is Wayne County. It's the largest county in the state. 17+% of the population, voting population, lives right here, home of Detroit. there's still 19% outstanding. We saw how the vote batch that just came in Milwaukee County split so heavily towards Harris. What does that mean for Michigan? Is there a possible pathway here, right here in Wayne? I think the big question right now is, if you look at the margin in Wayne right now, 64.5% to 32.4%, and you compare it back to 2020, underperforming by 4+ points. Yeah. And I think the question is this a composition or makeup of the vote up to this point? Or is this kind of what we've seen in urban areas, in Philadelphia, in Milwaukee, to some degree in Detroit, but also the added element here of the second largest city in this county is Dearborn. Dearborn has the largest Arab American community in Michigan. That has been a concern for Democrats because of what's happening in Gaza throughout the course of the last year, whether or not that has an effect as well. So we're going to have to wait and see as that vote comes in. That's really what we're waiting on right now. The other place where, if you're a Trump voter, you're looking at right now, this is the 2020 map, we'll flip back to 2024, 7% outstanding, and this is a place where not only is Donald Trump running up a margin in a Republican stronghold, he's blowing out his 2020 and 2016 margin.
At this point, somewhat academic, at least in the race, the official race for the White House, because we now do project that Donald Trump has been elected President of the United States. Phil, thank you very much. We will continue to count the votes as they come in because they do tell an important story, and there are still super important races for the Senate and Congress, which we will get to in a minute. In the meantime, let's go over to Casey and her panel now that we have projected a winner, Casey, in the presidential race.
We have indeed, John. The history this morning, 5:30 a.m. on Wednesday, that Donald Trump has won the presidency for a second time. This time after having served for 4 years, then disputing the 2020 election, and then, of course, rallying a mob to the Capitol to try to interrupt the peaceful transfer of power there. Americans deciding to send him back to the White House for a second term. And Jeff Duncan, as we mark this moment, I do want to take a second to reflect on that reality, because there was a point in the wake of what happened on January 6th where the Republican Party had a choice about what to do. They could have decided to convict him in his impeachment trial, which would have prevented him from running again in the future. They didn't do that. Kevin McCarthy went down to Mar-a-Lago, posed with Donald Trump, and it was the beginning of what would become another run for him to the presidency. And of course, now we know how that has turned out. Considering what you lived through, what the country lived through, what do you think it says about us as a country that we're here?
Well, I want to start by just a heartfelt congratulations or a sincere congratulations to Donald Trump. I've worked for 4 years to try to not elect him as a candidate for our party and also as president, but he's won the race and he's won it the hard way. I never would have thought we'd have been here. I think tens of millions of Americans, including Republicans, never thought we would have been here. You just add up all of the baggage along the way on the time in office and the time out of office. It's uncomfortable for somebody like me who is a lifelong conservative to watch this happen. But it is what it is. I think the ball's in his court. What's he going to do with this? Is he going to wreck the car because he wants to and because he can? Is he going to sow chaos and confusion and build anger? Or is he going to actually take the time to try to fix stuff? And he's that one personality that can actually do this. Like if he just changed course and just tried to work across the aisle and put a Nikki Haley in his cabinet, showed a propensity to work with people that he doesn't agree with, it would send shockwaves through this country in a positive way.
Well, considering he couldn't campaign right,
I was going to say,
what do we think?
That doesn't seem to be his mojo, right? That's not his deal, right? He doesn't kind of heal and bring people together and say, okay, now let's come together and move forward. And I think, Jeff, you said something earlier about solving problems. What concerns me is I don't think he cares about really solving problems except for the most expedient one of not going to jail, basically. I mean, when he was talking about tariffs, what have we heard? That's going to bring inflation back up. It's going to be bad for the economy and bad for jobs. So even some of the things, if he enacts some of the things he's talked about, mass deportations, what is that going to mean in the day-to-day lives in our country and the damage that could do? And I hear what folks are saying about, I agree, America, this is what you want, this is what you got, this is who you are. And yet we will have to live with the consequences if he does plan to and actually move forward on enacting. We could have a national abortion ban. Women are going to have to deal with it. So that's what my concern is. I don't think he's someone who's going to try to bring people together or try to work across the aisle. And given the way things seem to be going with the congressional races, he may not have to.
I used a hopeful tone.
But wait a minute.
I know, you
It
were
was a
hopeful.
hopeful tone.
Let's give
I know
Schmeichel
we always talk about these things of bringing people together, and I don't know if that's necessarily the aims of politics. You need dissension. You need two parties going back and forth. Did President Biden bring the country together after 3.5 years? I know a whole lot of Republicans who would say, hell no. When you spent 3.5 years criticizing these people, calling them racist, calling them bigots, referring to them as uneducated. And now they've won. They've shown force that they've won. They've rejected the elitism that comes out of Washington, D.C. They've rejected the elitism that has come from Republican establishment, and they've made it clear we want to go in a different direction. And I don't know why we keep ignoring this reality. Donald Trump won again by a very sizable margin for a reason, Casey. And I think to minimize the concerns that people continue to say they have about our party establishment, Jeff, about the Democratic Party establishment, is not going to change things. What propelled this man to the White House in 2016 is still there. It is still there. And I think it's incumbent upon the leaders in both parties to figure out what they need to do to serve those grievances.
I think
One thing, well, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Alex.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, one thing that sources are saying to me is it wasn't just that Republicans rehabilitated Donald Trump, but Democrats, including most especially the Biden White House, gave him an opening to come back. The fact is that Joe Biden, when inflation was coming back, they were very dismissive of concerns. They called it transitory. When it looked there was a potential for COVID to come back in the form of Delta and Omicron, they held a celebration in the White House South Lawn, called it Independence from COVID Day. There was Afghanistan. There was the denial and dismissiveness about the border was not a crisis. And all of those governing issues, they treated it in some ways. This is what I'm just reflecting the views of people within the administration as they're reflecting on tonight. They now feel that the administration sometimes treated it as a PR problem instead of an actual governance problem.
Well, and it absolutely created that opening. What we saw in polling during the Republican primary was that the primary message being used against Trump by his opponents, by Ron DeSantis, by Nikki Haley, was Donald Trump's gonna lose. He's a surefire loser. Go with me. I can be a winner. And yet in every poll I saw, when you asked Republican voters, who do you think has the best chance to beat Joe Biden? They'd say Donald Trump. Do you think that Donald Trump will beat Joe Biden? Those numbers were through the roof. Republicans felt confident that in a Donald Trump versus Joe Biden matchup, that Donald Trump was going to wipe the floor with Joe Biden. And that's why they felt confident saying, I like Donald Trump. You're not scaring me with this argument that he's going to lose. I think he's a winner. And they went ahead with him as their candidate.
One of the things that we also need to reflect on is Donald Trump is a very, very, very flawed man. And I don't think that can be lost on where we are today. I mean, you literally have someone who I don't want to run down the resume of who Donald Trump is in terms of the felonies and, inciting an insurrection and criminal charges that most likely now will go away because he now controls the Department of Justice, or, the things with Stormy Daniels, or all of these things that are kind of baked into the cake. But as a country, you asked a very big question, Casey. We became numb to the lack of character that is Donald Trump. And it's fascinating to me because I know religious conservatives who will go to the mat for Donald Trump. And that's what I don't necessarily understand. Somebody's going to have to explain to me, particularly the white male evangelical, and what we saw today were white women come out. I think that the missed bet for Kamala Harris was betting that white women would support her in a way unlike how we felt they left Hillary Clinton at the altar in 2016. We thought that was going to be vastly different, but in fact it wasn't. Rural white women, college-educated white women, suburban white women, all those white women we thought in those wild counties that Phil were talking about, they just didn't come home. And the question is, when you have someone who is as fundamentally flawed, there is no one around this table, there is no one who literally with good common sense would say, I want my child to grow up and be like Donald Trump.
But I think as everybody goes through this election and is trying to figure out what could have gone differently, I am sure there's going to be a lot of instinct to say, gosh, if only we just told Americans more of how Donald Trump was a terrible person and so and so. And I just think you have enough voters who are telling us in the exit polls, I don't like Donald Trump personally, but I'm voting for him anyways. I think
No,
there's
I hear you.
an extent to which people know those things.
Looking at. I was just trying to answer case. I hear you politically.
Yeah.
It's what you're saying is politically prudent. But you asked what questions do we learn as a country, and we literally have one of the most fundamentally flawed men that we've ever put in a position of power back there again. And all I have to do is point to the rhetoric, not from Democrats. I'm not making this up. I can point to the rhetoric from Republicans on January 7th.
Yeah.
And talk about what type of man this is.
I think that's the problem. I think Donald Trump, judged as a candidate, is almost like a Republican god, but judged as an actual executive isn't. And I think that's the problem. And he's got this very fragile period of time for the Republican Party where if he doesn't get his act together and doesn't clean up, his favorabilities are going to start to go down. You'll see that start to show up in the polling data. And the Republican Party is going to divide. To your point, Ronald Reagan would roll over in his grave if he listened to this, well, we won, and so we're just going to lock in and get our way, this 80-20 idea. And I think there's this gravitational pull that's happening in one segment of the Republican Party where, you're with me 80% of the time, you're a friend and an ally, not a 20% traitor. That mentality is lost in Donald Trump's administration.
I don't disagree with that, Jeff, necessarily. But I do think when you talk to a lot of rural Republican voters about the Republican Party, the whole Tea Party movement itself, they will say the establishment wing of the party, they have completely forgotten about us. We turn out and vote every single election. We empower these people, and they go to D.C. and they adopt policies and legislation and rhetoric that is completely irrelevant to mobilizing and uplifting us. And I hear that often. I spend a lot of time with Trump voters, and I talk to them about why they're so angry with our party. And they will go through a litany, going all the way back to Ronald Reagan, about all of the failures of the party writ large, and say, you know what, maybe I don't like Donald Trump. Maybe I don't like some of the rhetoric he uses. But you know what, sure, Michael, he's putting a spotlight on all of the failures from George W. Bush and the wars, and my son was killed, and the trillions of dollars we spent. Or I'll go back to the Gingrich era, and they said they were going to do this in terms of morality, and look what the hell happened. And folks are still angry about those things, Jeff. And I think the failure was on us as a party to not address those things. And we promised to address them, and we never got around to it, as long as we were winning elections.
I just think in a place of anger is a horrible place to make decisions and set policy. And that's the juxtaposed inside the Republican Party. There's this angry voice that's trying to set policy and direction, and that's what resonates with Donald Trump as a campaigner, but not as an executive.
But a lot of people in our party are angry, Jeff. And
two things can be right at the same time. They can be angry and they can be wrong.
That's fair, but why haven't we as a party attempted to reconcile that? Why haven't we? We had the Tea Party movement. It was a clear opportunity for us to figure out what in the hell are we doing wrong as a party? Why are so many people in our party looking at the leadership and saying, wait a minute here, you're still moving in the wrong direction?